everyone to the Commission on Ending Homelessness meeting. I think everyone knows why I'm filling in. It's a very sad reason, but we'll move on. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting. So could I have a motion to accept those minutes, please?
I'll make a motion to accept the last minutes on 2/16/23.
Thank you, Ron.
This is Shane. I'll second.
Thank you, Shane. Okay, so the first thing we want to cover, we're going to go a little differently than the agenda showed. We're going to cover the code enforcement from the city. So,
last meeting we had our rapid rehousing case managers here, and there were a lot of questions around code enforcement and the ability for code enforcement to regularly go out to units and do quite more than what they're currently doing. So code enforcement is on the line to answer any additional questions and better clarify the role of code enforcement for the individuals that have questions prior. And Brian Cheney is on the line. That is our code enforcement supervisor. So he is here, and I'll turn it over.
Trick, it's really hard to understand you. You've got a bad connection.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Brian Cheney, and I'm with the city code enforcement supervisor. And I heard that you guys had some questions for us, or you wanted me to provide you with some more insight on what we actually do. If you have those questions, I'll be glad to engage them. And just to give you a little history, what we do is we enforce especially our minimum housing codes for residential as well as multifamily structures. We do environmental nuisance such as trash, high weeds, overgrown vegetation, abandoned vehicle cars. Those are our primary violations that we enforce. Now, we are governed by the city, state, and federal ordinance, so therefore everything that we do is a process. It's not something that's going to happen immediately. For our environmental nuisances, we notify the owners and we give them 8 days to abate it, or will abate it at the city cost, at owner's expense. And if it's a housing case, it's something that can actually lead to a hearing and or civil fines and penalties. And that's really what we do in a nutshell. So if there's specific questions you have, I'll be glad to answer.
We had some in the chat. So Jennifer's asking, are you fully staffed in the code enforcement division?
We're hiring. We are hiring.
Okay.
Like every other agency, we're hiring.
Okay. And do you ride around to look for complaints, or do you respond to complaints?
It's usually 99.9% of the time it is responding. We have CityLink, which is our call center, 311, like the police 911. So citizen calls in and that generates the complaint. The code officers then go out and make the assessment, cite the property, and then we move forward in the process. We just don't have the luxury of just riding through and doing that, because it's always citizen generated task.
Andrea, you're muted.
Sorry. I saw Jennifer also posted that she was thinking of overgrown areas like on Liberty Street and in other city spaces where there's a lot of trash collecting. Mm-hmm. Is like for that, is that your department if it's open spaces, or are you just doing buildings and housing?
It's a combination. Some of that falls on code enforcement, other falls on the sanitation department.
Okay.
Now we do have some city lots that we do maintain. We contract the service out. And then you may see a lot of legal dumping. That has increased tremendously. And it's not just a Winston-Salem problem. It's a national problem. Legal dump sites. We have to contend with those as well. So it could be either or. It could be sanitation and or code.
Okay.
there was also a question about trash under bridges. Could you kind of go into how city versus state owning the land plays a role into that?
Yes, it's just like graffiti. If you got graffiti on a overpass interstate, that is DOT. You may get trash along rail areas. That's Norfolk, and we can't go, especially with the railroad, we can't go onto their site. We contact them, and then they do the cleanup themselves. We can refer some things out to the Department of Transportation with graffiti, trash on the interstate. We have a relationship with them, but it's not city. See, you may be going down up Interstate 52 or on 40, you may see a piece of furniture there. That is not code enforcement. We are within the city limits.
Okay. So I know in some of the work we've been doing with folks that have really challenging habitability issues in their apartments, one of their biggest concerns is retaliatory evictions. So if you are primarily responding to calls and complaints, are there things that you can do that help sort of protect those people who are calling in, or particularly the tenants, if other people are calling in?
Now, you can call into CityLink anonymous, and oftentimes that occurs too. And if that's got to be a common area, because we have to be able to have, if it's a apartment unit or a rental property, we have to have access to get in if it's not something that we can cite from the exterior.
Okay.
So usually folks will leave their information. And when they do have landlords that are trying to attempt to retaliate, we refer them to our Human Relations Department, which is also in connection with legal aid. So
Okay.
we always refer out to them.
You on mute, Kathleen.
Yeah. Blight has an impact on law enforcement. The overgrown areas may pose safety issues for law enforcement. We hope cameras are considered to watch the sites that are popular for dumping. Do y'all use cameras?
We have some in certain areas, certain locations. We need more. Our running joke here is that when we put up the sign that says no dumping, usually that's when people come and dump the most. So, it's like inviting people in, and we get it all the time from neighborhood organizations that says, hey, I want a no dumping sign. It's like, be careful, because historically it means to folks, they perceive it completely the opposite. So yeah, and we go out, and now we don't do a lot of the pruning. We'll get for higher vegetation, we're not gonna go out and prune. We will get it off the structure though. We'll make sure we get it off the structure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Folks have other questions?
You said you were hiring. How many people are you down in your department?
We're actually down 2 NCOs, which is our code officers, and a supervisor. So it's 3 right now. And then we have abatement team, so we're down 1 more on that side, and that's general labor. So we're down on that side as well.
And this came up in the meeting about violence, both issues, what Ms. Kurtz raised about the retaliatory practices that sometimes exist. I meet with a lot of all of the families who have had loved ones murdered. And so they are expressing concerns about their living conditions, particularly like the apartment complex on Cole Road, where there are language barriers and poverty issues. And they are afraid to call code enforcement, but we are also, I drive on Liberty Street and drive in the area, just drive around the neighborhoods, and I go to crime scenes. So I do see areas that appear to be common city property that are overgrown, that attract loitering, storage of guns, knives, and things like that. That's why I raised that issue. I have called CityLink myself, and I may have even emailed with you about some of those areas. And so do we need to talk to you, or do we need to talk to our council people about this, about the wards, about this particular issue? Because the cameras we have real-time crime centers now for the sheriff's department and the city, where we could have cameras on city buildings and then link to the real-time crime center. And
Okay.
these are issues that were raised in the neighborhood-wide city watch meeting last month, or the March meeting. So how do we get follow-up on these particular issues? Because I think that we all see the blight, and I know that Councilmember Burke is aware of it. There's a recent study that talked about how blight intersects with criminal crime rates, and how blight that is continuous is linked with a high crime rate. And so with people not having a safe, clean, aesthetic to live in, it impacts how they feel in all other areas of life. Would that be fair,
That is
Andrea?
that. Well, actually, you're speaking to that CCP report that the city did with consultant that talked about the blight and the crime. So yes, I'm familiar with that.
Okay.
Still, I would say if you're out and about and you see it, the best thing for us is to contact CityLink at 311 or 336-727-8000 and go ahead and get it put in our system. And then that creates a task. And then that gets routed to each NCO in that department. We are also, now that, COVID, we're out of COVID supposedly. There's more town hall meetings, so we'll be going to more of those, and we'll be getting feedback from council persons as well as residents and citizens. But if you see it, I would say make us aware of it. And someone, you can always call anonymous. That's what I would say. If folks feel like that they are afraid of the retaliatory practice, I don't know what else to say, because we just as code officers, we don't have the time to just patrol the area. We are usually 99.9% of the time, we are reacting to our task list that comes through from CityLink.
Thank you.
Are you familiar with if we have low income homeowners who are having habitability issues, or we have even some of our landlords are fairly cash strapped. If there's like small mom and pop folks, are there programs with the city that they can be connected to help address with some of the habitability issues?
Not with code enforcement. Now, code enforcement is to enforce
Right.
a housing code. So we don't have programs in code enforcement that address being proactive and being able to assist those landlords. Now, not to say that we may have some programs in our housing, which is still in the community development department. I'm not certain which you are speaking of specifically.
Okay.
If you can give me some specifics, then I may be able to guide you and be able to help address some of those issues.
Well, I think you kind of answered my question in that the property owner would need to contact the community development department separate from your being able to help connect them to resources when you go out for enforcement. Okay. So Robert has a question in the chat about what happens if we see sites where people are living but don't actually have an address. So I think he's talking about folks who are sleeping rough or sleeping outside. Do we call those into 211, and do those get routed to code enforcement or a different department?
When you see folks sleeping outside, help me to understand the question.
Robert, I don't know if you can explain your question anymore. His question was, for those that don't have actual address, would having the what 3 words address help, or dump sites?
So I'm guessing he's talking about like empty lots.
Okay.
So if there's an empty lot and there's trash on empty lots, they don't have addresses assigned to them. So how would you give information on, let's say, an empty lot without a house with a lot of trash, or corner of a street? What I'm thinking that's what he's asking.
Okay, I would say if you have the street, because we can cite the whole block. And then at least that gives the code office a vicinity. So as they move down that block, they'll probably see the area that you're addressing. And it gives us the ability to cite that block. And then we use GIS, which is the county tax parcel, that we are able to locate the owner of that parcel.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Hey, Brian, thank you very much for meeting with us and sharing the information.
I appreciate your time. And if you need me again, just let me know, okay?
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll go back to Kevin Cheshire from Halls. Kevin, it's all yours.
Hey, yeah, thanks. Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. Andrea had reached out and sort of asked me to give a little spiel about what we do. I know most of you are probably already familiar with that. I'll give a little bit of an overview, and then I'm happy to respond to questions. So our agency manages primarily two large programs. The first being public housing that we own, operate, and manage ourselves. And the second being what we call our housing choice voucher program. And I'll sort of get into some of the subcomponents of our voucher programs because they're not all the same. I'll add, somewhat unique to our agency, we've got sort of a third prong. We have what we call non-federal housing, meaning that we do have a housing stock, sites like Drayton Pines, Fairview Landing, it used to be Burke Village, the Plaza, the Heights, that used to be the Commons. Those are all sites that have nothing to do with HUD. Now, they may be receiving some subsidy in one form or another, but it's not through a federal standard HUD program. It's not what's traditionally been known as public housing. And that's sort of unique to Winston-Salem. That's not to say that other cities don't have some of that, but we have, relatively speaking, a lot. And it's sort of managed outside of the purview of the HUD guidelines, although all of that housing is affordable. Just to give a sort of a sense of the scope, and I guess probably the structure as well, we've got about 1,500 units within our portfolio. Now that does include what we refer to as Hope 6 properties. Some of you may be familiar with Hope 6 grants. Those no longer exist, but they were grants that were awarded a couple of decades back. And the purpose of those grants was to demolish aging public housing and then rebuild multifamily housing that was not concentrated poverty. There were various different income tiers. So we've got two legacy Hope 6 sites, Old Happy Hill and Old Kimberly Park Terrace. Just like to mention, whenever I'm talking about those sites, Housing Authority does not manage those sites. We have hired a management company and we are not the owner entity of those sites. So we're not the owner of those properties and we don't manage those properties, but we do have involvement in them because of the history. But it's relevant because that 1,500 count includes those 6 properties. We've got authority to administer approximately 4,500 vouchers, although because of the housing market right now, we don't actually have all 4,500 leased up, meaning we have the ability within our city to have 4,500 vouchers, but we've only got about 3,500 because that additional capacity just quite simply can't find housing even with the benefit of the voucher. Some of the folks on the call, like Sharika and Andrea, for sure have heard me say this at about every meeting. I do like to mention that we get exactly $0 from HUD to build new housing. And that's not some sort of policy position from me where I'm advocating for more money. That's just not the HUD structure. So a lot of times folks sort of look at the Housing Authority and they say, well, gosh, we've got a housing shortage, an affordable housing shortage. Why don't you solve it? Well, I can't solve it any more than any other housing developer can because I get no money to build new housing. I really have no advantage over anybody when it comes to trying to build new housing. Now, we've done a decent job of it, but it's a teardrop in the ocean when you compare what we've built in the last several years to what the need is. I mentioned this also because I know you guys were talking to Brian earlier about blight and code enforcement, and certainly some of our properties that you ride by, the curb appeal is ridiculously poor. And unfortunately, oftentimes that reflects the interior of the units as well. We've got deferred maintenance needs, period, full stop. It's not unique to Winston-Salem. And again, this is not a policy position that I'm taking or advocating. HUD will tell you that there is not enough funding and that housing authorities across the country have not been historically provided sufficient funding to keep up with the depreciation. So we get an allocation annually of capital funds that are intended to address capital needs. HUD will tell you that our capital needs everywhere exceed what they are providing as capital fund. So we get money to basically manage what we've got, and then we get money to sort of plug the leaks, but we don't get money to make substantial improvements. So that's why you see housing that was built in the middle of the last century still looking like it was built in the middle of the last century, because there haven't been any upgrades. It's not because we don't care, we don't want to, it's because the funding doesn't match. And so we have to chase large scale grants if we are to make substantial improvements to our public housing stock. I'll run through some numbers and then I'll shut up. I don't want to bore you to death with data. I think it's important for this group to know sort of our homeless designations and preferences and programs. You know, that might be the most directly relevant to sort of your mission and function. Within our non-federal portfolio, we have 9 units at Drayton Pines that are reserved for formerly homeless families. We have 9 units at the Heights, which used to be called the Commons, out off of Old Greensboro, that are reserved for homeless families. So that's it as far as the homeless reservation with respect to the non-federal housing that operates outside of HUD. With respect to our public housing stock, right? So we're talking about Cleveland Avenue Homes, Piedmont Park, Sunrise Towers, Crystal Towers, those types of properties. At Cleveland Avenue, we have the ability to go up to 24. Historically, we've liked to cap that at 12, just because it gets a little unruly with respect to case management. If you're bringing in 24, that's about 10% of your total allocation. So historically, we've liked to cap that at 12. Piedmont Park, again, capacity to do 24. Homeless preference, historically, we've capped that at 13. Sunrise Towers, capacity to go to 19. Historically, we've capped that at 12. I think that's okay news. The unfortunate news is that of that capacity, which is roughly 70 units, we've only got 6 right now that are filled with families that have transitioned out of homelessness that are in our housing with some degree of case management. Okay, so we're underserving that. We're underutilizing that allocation. Moving on to some of the, I'm going to pivot now. Okay, I've talked about what we call hard units. That's to say brick and mortar units, units that are owned, operated, and managed by the housing authority, whether they're receiving HUD subsidy or not. Okay, I've left that alone. I'm pivoting over to what we call soft units, which are units that are provided via the utilization of a voucher. So all we do in that case is basically hand somebody a voucher subsidy and then pat them on the behind and say, good luck, go find housing with that voucher subsidy. Various different programs that are specific to the homeless population that I just want to make sure I'm mentioning. TBRA, okay, we administer that essentially via a contract with the city. So the funding comes through the city, and then the city says, here you go, here's this pot of money for subsidy, but you've already got a program set up to do this, you guys go do it. And that's a wonderful partnership. TBRA stands for Tenant-Based Rental Assistance. And we've got about 30 of those that are available, and we've got about 24 of them that are being utilized. So that's not bad. We have to have a referral through the KIC in order to utilize one of those. So it's not like I can just ride down the road, you know, see somebody that's sleeping on the street and then, you know, say, hey, come into my office, we'll get you a voucher. That's got to come through the KIC for us to do that with that TBRA, Tenant-Based Rental Assistance. PSH is permanent supportive housing. Likewise, administered via contract with the city. Likewise, we've got about 30 of those that are available. Only about 13 of those of the 30 is being utilized. That begs the question, well, why? Well, TBRA just requires homelessness, permanent supportive housing requires homelessness plus a disabling condition. Okay, and those referrals are also coming through the KIC. Moving down to another sort of subcategory of vouchers is something known as emergency housing vouchers. Now that is a HUD program. We applied for those emergency housing vouchers and were awarded them. We've got 31 of those. 27 of those are leased. So that's a really strong number. I'm happy with that. That requires homelessness plus some additional factors. I take that back. Additional is not the right word. It's more broad. So yes, if you certified homeless, chronic homelessness, yes, absolutely that counts. You can also utilize one of those vouchers if you're at risk of homelessness, fleeing domestic violence. So we've got a little bit of a broader eligibility category there. The next category are VASH vouchers. Those are for veterans. Again, that's a HUD program that requires homelessness plus veteran status. We've got 144 of those. 90 of those are being utilized. The last category are mainstream vouchers, another HUD program that requires non-elderly disabled status plus some additional things. So either currently institutionalized, at risk of institutionalization, or previously homeless or transitioning from permanent supportive housing. We've got 278 of those. Only 61 of those are utilized. Those mainstream vouchers can be referred over, the individuals can be referred over through the KIC, through Partners Behavioral Health, or through Solutions for Independence. And I failed to mention that those VASH vouchers, the veteran vouchers, the referring agency there is the Veterans Administration. So I'm gonna shut up because I think your questions for me are probably going to be more helpful to the group than anything I might sort of try to project or preempt. So I'm happy to sort of elaborate on any of that or clarify, but I hope that at least sort of provides some context for you guys who aren't as familiar with our agency, and I'm happy to respond as best I can to questions. And Andrea, I'm not looking at the chat, so if there's anything there that I've missed, or if you can shout that out, I'm happy to jump in.
You're on mute.
Thanks. A couple questions from Cynthia Jeffries. Does the city not provide any money for ongoing maintenance?
So for, oh, I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Andrea? Okay, so the city doesn't provide us with money for ongoing maintenance. And they shouldn't. I mean, that's just not how it's structured. That ongoing maintenance is through HUD. And the capital needs, which is to say to cover depreciation, that is also through HUD. Now I will say, and I don't report to the city, so I can say anything I want about the council or the mayor or whatever. So this is not some sort of like disingenuous effort to blow smoke at them, but they've been really good, especially recently, at trying to work with us to figure out how we can collaborate and utilize some funding that the city has access to that I do not, to try to cover some of this delta between what we all recognize to be the need from a financial standpoint in addressing the capital and what HUD provides. So I hope that's responsive to the question. The short story is no, the city doesn't, but it's not, the program's not structured that way. But the city leadership has been really, really good lately at just trying, and I say lately just because I haven't been in the position that long. So since I've been in the role, it's been very collaborative to try to work to identify some alternative funding sources that we can use to try to address the capital need for the housing stock for which I'm responsible.
Okay, thanks. And she also asked, what is KIC?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so that's what Andrea helped me. Community Intake Center.
Oh,
Did I
yeah.
have that right?
Okay, we call it the CIC.
Oh, okay. So we'll have to change how we're referring to it at the Housing Authority.
I kind of like KIC. That's, that's new to the
I know,
all
I
the
kind of
little
like,
stuff we have.
We're not great spellers, so we thought CIC was how you spelled the real words.
oh, yeah, no, it's an acronym. Because
I'm joking around.
us here in homeless services really like
Look, we just HUD throws so many acronyms at us. We just try to make it an actual word, and it makes it easier. So that's what we go with.
Yeah, I
hear
kind of
ya.
like KIC. I like it.
So, Jennifer Martin's asking, are the majority of residents city-owned buildings using vouchers?
the majority of residents in city-owned buildings.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could speak to that just because I don't have my arms around all of the city-owned properties. I can speak to a couple of properties I'm familiar with. I would say, and these are small, okay? The ones I'm talking about are really small. I would say it's somewhere between a third and a half. The ones that I know about as far as the residents of those buildings and which ones are receiving a subsidy through our program. Now, I will mention the plaza is sort of unique. Historically, everyone has thought of the plaza as being owned by the housing authority. It's a weird structure. Plaza is actually owned by the city and we manage it. And it's a little bit higher proportion, north of 50% at the plaza who have vouchers. So I hope that's helpful.
Okay. And how is, Cynthia Jeffries comes back and asks, how is Cleveland Avenue Homes being rebuilt if Hope 6 has gone away?
Great question. So Hope 6 has sort of morphed and HUD doesn't call it Hope 6 anymore. They call it Choice Neighborhoods. So this Choice Neighborhood grant is what we received for Cleveland Avenue Homes to rebuild Cleveland Avenue Homes. And it's just, Hope 6 2.0. And what HUD has done is sort of recognize that just going in, tearing down a building and building better buildings with different income tiers, while better is a long way from good. And so what HUD has recognized is if you're going to do that, you need to invest in the people so that you're giving them the tools that they need to be successful when they move into the new housing with different income tiers. And then the other thing that you need to do is build infrastructure around the new housing. So we call that neighborhood. And so we're going to do things like maybe streetscape improvements or revolving lines of credit or facade improvement, that type of thing, so that you're not just going in and rebuilding the housing, but you're providing the infrastructure for the people living in that housing. And you're trying to improve, you're acknowledging the economic development aspect as well.
How's the development going at Cleveland Avenue?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons we were awarded the grant is because we had this thing called an off-site phase, which just means that Brown Elementary School was included in the plan. And you guys are probably all familiar with the old Brown Elementary, on Highland. So to answer your question, Andrea, it's going great at Brown Elementary. We had a real slowdown because COVID and inflation, labor shortages, material cost increases. Once we address that, Brown School is off, man, they're off and running. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ridden by there recently. We had the groundbreaking like maybe in December, and there are multiple buildings that are framed up now. So we're really rolling over there. Cleveland Avenue proper, we've relocated about 80 families successfully off of Cleveland Avenue. You guys have probably seen some of those buildings along Cleveland running north and south already boarded up. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we were hoping to close what we call phase 2, which is really the first phase of Cleveland Avenue. We were hoping to close that this year. That's not going to happen. We're going to close the first phase on Cleveland Avenue in the first quarter of 24. But we're also going to close phase 3 in 2024. So that we've delayed phase 2, but we've merged phase 2 and phase 3. So we should start seeing demolition early in 2024 at Cleveland Avenue on those first phases. And then likewise seeing buildings coming out of the ground pretty quickly thereafter in 2024.
Okay. And how many units do you have at Cleveland Avenue now? And how many will you have serving the same sort of income bracket after the development?
Another really good question. Andrew, I don't know if you're reading these or these are your own, but they're really good. So I don't want to give you too much credit. Okay. So
some of them are mine, some of them are other people.
Okay, all right. So there are 244 units out there now. Okay. And stay with me here because this is going to get convoluted and I don't mean for it to. I just want to give an honest and full answer. 244 that we're losing, they're going away. 199 of those are going to be replaced as brick and mortar units, what we call hard units. Okay. That's 199 of approximately 400. So we're losing 244. We're building 400, of which 199 are what we call replacement units. They're serving the exact same population that's currently being served. So that begs the question, well, what the heck happened to the other 45? The other 45 are being replaced as quote soft units, meaning HUD has given us an additional 45 vouchers that we would not otherwise have to be absorbed. So some of those 45 vouchers have already been absorbed. We've worked with Goler, we've worked with some other community partners to house folks via those vouchers. So that's how that's happening.
Okay. And then the other 201 units are serving a different income
Various
bracket.
different income tiers. Yeah. And it's, you know, so some of them are what people generally refer to as like workforce housing. You might have heard them as called tax credit units.
Mhm.
It's just a little bit of a higher income tier. Most of the folks we serve are at and below 30% of area median income. Now we can go a lot higher than that, but most of our population's at or below 30% of area median income, which is a HUD mandate. That's the target population we're obligated to serve. Those tax credit units go a little bit higher than that. And then we've got some units that are unrestricted, which is good, right? We want that mix of income. We don't want to reconcentrate poverty and stigmatize a building or a community or neighborhood. But to be fair, right? I mean, the market rate over there is not going to be $2,000, a month. It's going to be a reasonable, what we call naturally occurring affordable housing, right? So some of those will be naturally occurring affordable. They just won't have any income means test.
Okay.
Okay,
Do you have a
Andrea-
sense of,
Andrea,
go ahead,
oh,
you go.
yeah, I'm gonna prevent you from having to read another question.
Okay.
So, if you acknowledge that there's a lack of affordable housing in Winston-Salem, what do you think the role of the housing authority is in helping to solve that issue?
Oh man, that's another great question. So the first answer is build, which I think we've done. I mean, we've brought a lot of, well, relative to an agency of our size, we brought a lot of new units out of the ground, and we've acquired a lot of units that either were not affordable or they had been offline. The former Commons is an example of that. So first thing we got to do is we've got to be out there trying our best to chase money and build. And we're doing that. Okay. The second thing that we need to do is we need to facilitate the development of new affordable housing. We have the ability to issue bonds. And we've done that. So they're tax exempt bonds. And so it gives the borrower a lower interest rate. We've done 2 of those in the last couple of years. We're getting ready to do a third, and that facilitates the development because we can't do it all ourselves, right? We know that. So we can issue the bonds. That's the second thing. The third thing that we can do is we can recruit landlords to participate in our Section 8 program. You know, if all landlords in the city were willing to participate in the Section 8 program, I wouldn't have 1,000 vouchers that aren't being utilized, right? And so, and look, I don't want to suggest that if you're a landlord, you're not participating in the Section 8 program, that makes you a bad person. That is not the case. It is sometimes the case, okay? It is sometimes a proxy for something else. And, you know, so that's wrong. It's dead wrong. We all agree on that. But we historically, as an agency, have not had great customer service. And I'm not trying to, you know, cast aspersions, but the position that we take as an agency can't be, oh, if you're calling as a landlord, you're not our priority. No, we need you. We need you. If you've got your housing in our program, we need you to keep it there, and we need you to maintain it, and we need you to want to work with us. We need to reduce the red tape, and we need to do a really good job of reaching out to landlords and explaining that. So look, I could talk to you, Ms. Jeffries, for a year about my other more creative thoughts. I think we can work with federal legislators and try to reactivate some of these auxiliary dwelling units by making the income that people earn on those auxiliary dwelling. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about a mother-in-law suite in your backyard. I think you can say, hey, that income's tax exempt if you lease it to a Section 8 resident. Because then you're activating a housing stock that's currently not serving that population. And you're also moving people into areas of opportunity. Because most of the families with those auxiliary dwelling units are sitting on a half-acre lot, you know, in an area of town that historically hasn't provided housing to Section 8 participants. So look, I could go on and on about
Okay.
my
All right.
thing, but those are the 3 big things.
Okay, great answer. And now I got one follow-up question.
Yeah, I got you.
And that was when you talked about evolving from Hope 6 to choice neighborhoods, you talked about training the residents to, I guess, have a higher skill level. Is that still a part of or how do you incorporate that into your thinking. And then my last question is, somebody asked that.
No, you said only one last one.
Sorry, I'm sorry. This is an easy one though, I think.
Okay.
Okay. As code enforcement, were they hiring and how much staff did they have? Are you hiring and do you have all of the staff that you need? And I'm done.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is the easier one. So yeah, thank you for that. So to answer the question about sort of the people infrastructure, to answer the question about the people infrastructure, so we've got what we call a people lead, and it's an organization called Urban Strategies. And they've got an office in the middle of Cleveland Avenue Homes. It's an old apartment, and they focus on things like mobility, meaning where are you going when you get rehoused? How are you prepared to come back? Job skills training, access to transportation, access to healthcare, public safety, education, those types of things. And so Urban Strategies is providing case management to all of the residents of Cleveland Avenue Homes, the ones that are still there and the ones that have already been relocated off of the site. Is that responsive to your first question? And then our staffing?
So the training, there will be ongoing training even when they're no longer living at Cleveland Avenue Homes.
Correct. The case management stays in place and then they
Okay.
come back. And here's the beauty of it too. Once these new apartments are built, there are case managers assigned to those apartments indefinitely. So, you know, that's not just like, okay, they're built, you've moved in, congratulations, hope it works out for you. That is part of the housing budget for that particular phase moving forward.
Okay, but the housing authority per se, you've contracted with Urban Strategies to deliver this service, if you will.
Yes, ma'am.
That's right.
HUD would not have awarded us the grant if the housing authority had been the one to provide the people services, because we have no social workers. We have nobody that's trained to do that. So that's why that went that way. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, and staffing. We've had a tremendous staffing shortages. We have just hired up for our Section 8 specialists, which are essentially caseworkers for our Section 8 participants, as well as our maintenance technicians. Those are two that are hard to fill, and there's a lot of turnover. Do I have the staff that I need? No. But do I have the funding to hire more staff? No. So basically, unlike Brian, I'm basically at capacity right now.
Another question from the chat. Is Haas involved with helping relocate residents from the Willie Davis apartment that I believe the city owns?
Okay. Yes. At first I was like, okay, how do I answer? So we are engaged, and there are some of our voucher holders are there, and we're engaged in that capacity. The challenge is our waiting list is closed. Our Section 8 waiting list is closed. And as I've described to you guys, I just don't have a tool in my belt to say, well, gosh, X person is in a real bad housing situation, and I know that, so I can give them a voucher and I can move them somewhere. I've just got so many programmatic restrictions. Now, I do have sometimes units coming open that are outside of HUD, and they don't have such rigid eligibility criteria and waiting list management. And sometimes I can jump in and help. And I'm in touch with city staff about that, but it's fluid. It's not like, you know, Sharika can't call me and say, hey, do you have 50 units? And I say, yes. I may say that today, and I may not say that next week. So it's all a timing thing, but I'm aware of it. We're working together, but it's not something that our agency is heavily involved in or leading.
Other questions for Kevin? I really appreciate your time today. It's been really helpful conversation.
You're nice to say that. You've heard me talk enough to know that this is an anomaly then, if it was helpful. So I appreciate you guys for what y'all are doing, and thanks for letting me join, and look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Kev.
You all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so let's see. Next is Sharika to give us an update on the home-based project.
Okay, so can I share my screen, Kathleen? If that's possible.
Yes. Hold on. Yeah, you should be able to.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So in October 2022, we had an action plan submitted for the city council review. And that action plan was in regards to, we had Homebase, an organization from based in California, to come and do a review of our continuum of care. So from that review of our continuum of care, there was an action plan created. And this is just an update to the action plan. So the action plan was passed at the end of October 2022 by City Council. In the action plan, there are 7 various things that we are looking at. One, and I'll just go over each and then where we are currently. One, the COC structure. So that is empowering the operating cabinet with decision-making and leadership authority, and to adopt an action-oriented structure. Currently with the COC structure, we first have to build our operating cabinet before we can make that change. A lot of the current agencies that participate in our operating cabinet are those that are being funded. So it would be, I don't want to say impossible, but it would be kind of hard to have those same people voting on the funds that are being allocated. So at this time, until we build that operating cabinet, the number of agencies that we have involved, that we haven't started to change that structure and put the operating cabinet in that decision-making role. This is also more conversations going around this because of how that structure would affect things such as funding, allocations, and things like that. 2, leadership. So clearly delineating roles and responsibilities for lead staff in our organizations. Identifying where staff support is needed for our COC activities to ensure that our priorities are moving forward and members are actively participating. So what we have done previously is discuss, myself and Andrea, the miscommunication of what each role is. So the city is the collaborative applicant for the continuum of care. So we ensure compliance with the funding, we apply for the funding, and we assist with creating that funding process where Alan and another team of community members go in and read those applications, score them, and prepare those for who will get the funds. So Andrea and I have had conversations about the miscommunication in roles and kind of talked about how we can separate collaborative applicant from COC lead and different roles that we see are needed in the COC. One thing that we have talked about is redoing our policies and procedures, which ties a lot into this, which is actually going on our operating cabinet meeting next week. So that is part of the conversation that we're having next week in operating cabinet. Engagement, so developing a robust orientation, education, and training program to support new members as well as active members. Andrea and her team have started back up Action Camp. So Action Camp is something that is done to get all of the agencies together and discuss various resources, various new techniques to utilize. Different trainings can go on at these action camps, so it's a time for them to brainstorm, come together, and also gives them a chance to meet individuals that's not just via Zoom. So there is more training that needs to be done. We have talked about doing some retreats, bringing in HUD to also do TA, things of that nature. But that's where we are on engagement. Number 4 is the Community Intake Center. So identifying financial resources to conduct a deep and thorough evaluation of the Community Intake Center process and policies. So this is mainly about accessibility and assessments. So during the community forums, one of the big things that came up when we did community forums last year, as well as when we did the community forums over the last 2 or 3 days, we did one yesterday and 3 yesterday, and then another the day before. One of the biggest things is, where do you find services, who you call, how do you market that, and are we really accessible? So accessibility has been one of the biggest things. So one of the things that has been discussed that we are hoping to have completed by the end of the year is having additional locations where individuals can go in for services. And that is one of the things. And also looking for a third party to come in and do a evaluation of our community intake center and see where we can improve on assessment and accessibility. Our shelter and housing. So reviewing and revising the policies and procedures around housing placement to ensure that individuals and households are being appropriately matched and referred to housing that fits their needs. Identifying an expert on permanent supportive housing to provide information, advice, and support, and expanding supportive services. So our permanent supportive housing project is what Kevin just kind of touched on. So our permanent supportive housing project is the Section 8 vouchers that we are funding for those experiencing homelessness. Currently, we have a work group together of city staff, agency staff that utilize these vouchers. We met 2 weeks ago. We meet again. Well, we're meeting every 2 weeks. So we're discussing the bottlenecks that are in the system. We're discussing what needs we have. So maybe the tenant-based rental assistance isn't working because there's no units. So how do we switch to project-based? If we have these units slotted just for persons with experiencing homelessness, are these units being utilized for our program? Are they still available? So having those conversations, we have a meeting with our housing authority to discuss our permanent supportive housing program and how they can better support those that we are serving. That meeting is, I want to say, is in 2 weeks as well. So that would be with the team that is currently meeting from the COC every 2 weeks to strengthen that. For our policies and procedures, there were new scope of work services done for all of our programs. And those scope of work services dive more into making sure that all the agencies are housing first, making sure that all the agencies are working in a low barrier and trauma-informed approach when providing services. And another thing that we're working on, which is on the operating cabinet agenda also for next week, is making sure that progressive engagement is in our policies and procedures. Currently, we have an amount cap. So one thing that we did talk about adding on to that operating cabinet agenda is making sure that our policies and procedures read in a progressive engagement way. So instead of saying a family of 4 gets $2,900 or $5,000, we are going by barriers. A low barrier household will receive, let's say, 1 to 3 months of assistance. A household that presents with high barriers will receive up to 24 months. And then the assessment team has been looking at the various assessments that we use to identify barriers and how appropriate they are. Services, so services kind of ties back into that number 1 COC structure, expanding the types of services people receive while waiting for housing and while they're in stable housing. So streamlining how the COC, so we'll first start there. So once again, bringing in those other additional supportive services that are needed, making those connections with various organizations that can assist us with not only maintaining not only the individuals while they're in shelter, but also once we put them into housing, can assist us with keeping those individuals in housing. Streamline how the COC helps people become document ready. Right now, our COC has a heavy focus on being document ready before a file can go through the system. So it holds a lot of people up from being obtaining housing. If we're working in a housing first approach, we have to find ways to keep individuals from having to become document ready before receiving a case manager to assist them with those other items they may need. And then focus resources on hiring and training staff to better serve special populations. One of the biggest things that was in that they received out of the focus groups and looking at our data is the lack of services we provide to the Latino community. And that was one thing that we do have to look at, is how to better involve agencies such as the Hispanic League, or also how to better integrate ourselves into communities, Latino communities. Then number 7 is data. we have to better integrate our data analysis and evaluations into our decisions and strategies of the COC. Currently, HUD has placed a huge emphasis on data when we are applying for funding. So we are looking to develop a data committee who can focus on the data for the COC. What we have done so far is urged each of the agencies to apply for a data entry position through various funding sources, or create a data entry position through their own resources that they currently have. So there will be about 3 data entry individuals coming on this next funding cycle, which will allow us to develop a data committee. Currently, only about 1 or 2 other agencies beside the city has individuals specifically working on their data entry who doesn't do the case management or who isn't an executive director or anything like that. So having someone who is specifically working on data in each of these agencies will help us have clear data and help us create this data committee so that we can have individuals who's able to closely look at the data each day. Okay, so I don't think, is there any questions?
There's none in the chat.
Okay. And then the unsheltered NOFA, I got your text.
Oh.
Just an update on that. So the unsheltered NOFA, we applied for the unsheltered NOFA, which is geared, it's kind of the same as our annual COC funds, but it is geared specifically towards unsheltered homeless persons. The unsheltered NOFA, some of the money and funding information came out, and at that time it was just large cities and states that received it, and we are still waiting for the second allotment of money and crossing our fingers we are in that allotment. I did get invited to a meeting with the state to discuss the allotment that they have received, and I am hoping that they're looking to share, but we don't have any information as of now if we were awarded the money. But I check every day, so as soon as HUD awards the rest of the money, it was a total of, I want to say 316 million. Once they award the rest, then I would definitely let you guys know if we're part of that allotment.
Okay. Any other questions for Sharika?
Great job, Sharika. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Okay, so does anybody have any other business announcements or anything? Okay, so our next meeting, well, we meet every 3rd Thursday at 2:30. So our next meeting will be in April. So thanks to everybody for coming, and we'll see you in April.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye,
great month.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.